Well, it's all the colors we have here on Earth, and then some more.
New colors. Wow. Are there many people in heaven?
Yes, there are a lot of people.
Colton Burpo, the boy who claimed to have visited heaven after a near-death experience, became famous around the world after sharing the incredible details of his divine encounter. His story inspired millions, sparked debates, and led to a best-selling book and a movie adaptation. But now, more than 23 years later, Colton has stepped away from the spotlight, leaving many people wondering what happened to him. Where is Colton Burpo today? Has he chosen to live a quiet life away from the attention? Or is there more behind his decision to remain private after the experience that changed everything? Join us in this video as we find out. Colton Burpo's story, 23 years later. 2 decades after a medical emergency nearly claimed his life, Colton Burpo, the little boy whose extraordinary near-death experience inspired the best-selling book and the 2014 movie Heaven is for Real, is now opening up about how that unforgettable moment shaped his faith, changed the direction of his life, and helped form the person he is today. In 2003, when Colton was only 3 years old, his life suddenly changed when he was rushed into emergency surgery after his appendix ruptured. The situation was critical, and doctors worked quickly to save him. After the surgery, Colton shared that he experienced something he described as an out-of-body experience, where he felt he left his physical body and entered heaven. During this experience, Colton said he was able to see things happening around him that he could not have known about, including his parents praying separately in different parts of the hospital and doctors desperately working to keep him alive. But according to Colton, the most powerful moment came when he encountered Jesus, who he said comforted him while angels surrounded him and sang. However, one of the most emotional and surprising parts of Colton's story was his description of meeting his unborn sister in heaven. A child his parents, Sonia and Todd Burpo, had lost through miscarriage years earlier and had never told him about. Colton recalled the moment, saying, "This little girl came running out and just gave me this giant old bear hug. Eventually, she told me who she was. She was my sister, and she was so excited that someone from her family was finally in heaven." The revelation left his parents stunned because Colton had no way of knowing about the child they had lost. As he continued sharing more details about what he claimed to have experienced, his family became even more convinced that his story was something truly remarkable. Over the years, Colton's experience captured the attention of millions of people around the world. His story became a source of comfort and hope for many, especially those grieving the loss of loved ones, struggling with the pain of losing a child, or searching for answers about what happens after death. Now, more than 23 years later, Colton Burpo is no longer the young boy whose story amazed the world. At 27 years old, he has grown into a completely different chapter of life, carrying the memories of that childhood experience while building a future of his own. Today, Colton is a husband, father, electrician, and worship pastor. He and his wife have recently welcomed their first child, a major milestone that has given him a deeper understanding of love, family, responsibility, and the purpose behind life itself. "I'm about ready to be a first-time dad," he shared during a recent interview with CBN News, reflecting on how far he has come since the terrifying medical emergency that changed everything. Although Colton continues to share his heaven experience through speaking events and conversations about faith, he explains that his relationship with God is no longer built only around that one extraordinary moment. He says that as he grew older, especially during his teenage years, he began to understand that faith was not simply about the experience he had as a child. Instead, it was about developing a daily relationship with God and allowing that faith to guide his choices, struggles, and personal growth. Colton described a turning point during high school when he felt God challenging him to look beyond his childhood experience. "I remember in high school, that's around the time God really started challenging me. It was like he was saying, 'Hey, you don't have to rely on this one experience with me. I want to do life with you. I want to be a part of your life today.' And it took me a while to get to that point. But now, as you see, I take my faith very seriously." Despite the worldwide attention and fame that came after the release of Heaven is for Real, Colton has remained focused on living a humble and authentic life. Rather than allowing his experience to define him completely, he believes his actions, character, and relationship with God are what truly matter. He often speaks about the importance of living with purpose and making sure his life reflects the faith he believes in. Faith has been something very core to me because, obviously, if I'm not living my life to give glory and honor to Jesus in whatever I'm doing, then it's not really worth it. Looking back on his journey, Colton also admits that experiencing what he describes as heaven did not suddenly make him perfect or remove all of life's struggles. He explains that faith is a continuous process filled with challenges, personal battles, growth, and moments of learning. It has been interesting to wrestle with and figure out because just because I went to heaven and came back doesn't mean I'm this angelic person who is free from temptation and free from sin. I'm far from it, and God has thankfully been faithful and patient with me. But now, 23 years later, as we look at where Colton Burpo is today, let's go back and uncover the story behind the extraordinary encounter that changed his life forever. Colton Burpo's journey to heaven. His story began back in Imperial, Nebraska, in 2003. At that time, I was only 3 years old, and everything changed in a way no one could have expected. It all started when I became very sick. At first, doctors believed I only had a stomach bug, but the situation was far more serious than anyone realized. The truth was that I had appendicitis, and my appendix had already ruptured. It had been ruptured for nearly 5 days before doctors finally discovered what was actually happening. After my condition became clear, my parents rushed me to the hospital, where I was taken into emergency surgery. It was during that first surgery that I experienced what I describe as a near-death experience. I felt as though I lifted out of my body, and suddenly, I could see everything happening around me. I could see the doctors working on me as they fought to save my life. I could also see my parents during that moment. I saw my mom in one room, talking on the phone and praying with people who were supporting our family. I saw my dad in another room, praying loudly and crying out to God. He was overwhelmed, frustrated, and desperate because he did not know what was going to happen to me. At that moment, I was scared and completely confused. I had no understanding of what was happening or why I was seeing everything around me. But then, something changed. Suddenly, I found myself with Jesus. I was sitting on his lap, and he comforted me. He asked angels to sing to me because he knew I needed peace and reassurance. During that time, the angels sang some of my favorite songs, including Jesus Loves Me and Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho. I even made a request that they sing We Will Rock You by Queen, but I was told that they could not sing that song. After Jesus and the angels helped calm me down, Jesus sent one of the angels to take me and show me heaven. That incredible experience later became the foundation of my family's story. Heaven is for real, and the ministry connected to sharing that message, Heaven Real Ministries. The story is about how, as a 3-year-old child who was almost 4, I experienced a near-death experience, went to heaven, and saw things that I believed were beyond anything I could have imagined. It is also about how my dad, who was a pastor, tried to understand what had happened. My dad knew I was too young to have learned certain things because I had never studied those parts of the Bible. Yet I was describing things that seemed to connect with Scripture. There were details I shared that left my family wondering how I could possibly have known them, because there was no obvious way I could have learned those things on my own. While I was in heaven, I also had the chance to meet my great-grandfather. One of the things I remember most about heaven was that there were no elderly people there. Everyone I saw appeared young, healthy, and full of life. The adults looked like they were in their late 20s or early 30s, almost like they were in the prime of their lives. Nobody needed glasses. Nobody needed assistance walking. Nobody had physical struggles or illnesses. Everyone appeared completely restored, healthy, and full of energy. When I met my great-grandfather, I saw him as a young man standing in the throne room. He came toward me and asked, "Are you Todd's son?" I answered, "Yes." Then he told me, "Well, I'm his grandpa. When I was not with Jesus in heaven, I spent time with my great-grandfather, who I called Pop. He was there with me, looking after me, and making sure I was okay. One of the things that amazed my family happened later when my dad found an old photograph of my great-grandfather. He showed it to me without explaining anything about who was in the picture. He simply handed it to me and asked me to look at it. The moment I saw the photograph, I said, "Hey, how did you get a picture of Pop?" That completely surprised my dad because he could not understand how I knew who the person in the picture was. He wondered how I could recognize someone I had never met or been told about. Later, my great-grandmother, Pop's wife, was still alive at the time. My dad showed me the picture again and asked if I recognized anyone else. I said no. Then he asked me, who was Pop married to? I answered, that's Great-Grandma Ellen. But after looking closer at the picture, I said, that doesn't look like Great-Grandma Ellen. Those small moments became some of the details that deeply surprised my family because they were things I seemed to know without anyone ever telling me. However, one of the biggest moments that impacted my mom was something connected to a loss that happened before I was even born. Before having me, my parents experienced a miscarriage and lost a child. They had always wondered what happened to babies who are lost before birth, because the Bible does not clearly explain every detail about miscarried or unborn children. But according to my experience in heaven, I met my sister, and she was actually the very first person I encountered there. After the angel brought me to heaven, I found myself sitting on a road that led into heaven. Then suddenly, I saw a little girl running toward me from the gates. She came straight toward me and gave me the biggest hug. Because I was only 3 years old at the time, I still believed in things like cooties. So my first reaction was confusion. I remember thinking, who are you? Why are you hugging me? What is happening? Then she explained who she was. She told me that she was my sister, and she was incredibly happy because someone from her family had finally arrived in heaven. That moment was especially meaningful because she looked like she belonged to my family. Could his divine encounter have revealed mysteries about heaven and uncovered truths that would forever change his family's lives? Keep watching to find out. Colton Burpo reveals heaven's secrets. While I was in heaven, I also had the incredible opportunity to meet and interact with many different people from the Bible. I encountered figures whose stories I had only known from Scripture, including King David, Samson, the apostles Peter and John, Mary the mother of Jesus, and John the Baptist, who was Jesus' cousin. I also had the chance to meet and interact with the archangels Michael and Gabriel, which was one of the most unforgettable parts of my experience. One of the things that stood out to me the most about heaven was that everyone there, with the exception of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, had wings.
So there are two conversations I had with Jesus when I was in heaven. One of them is Jesus just teaching me, Colton, this is how you get to heaven. If you love me and follow me.
Everyone was dressed in bright white clothing, and each person wore a sash with different colors. It was not like the traditional picture people often imagine, where everyone has a small halo floating above their head. Instead, I remember seeing something different, almost like a flame or a glowing fire above their heads. I remember that everyone in heaven had wings, and in some ways, we were similar to angels. However, we were not angels because there were actual angels who existed separately from us. When I interacted with the archangels Michael and Gabriel, they looked very much like humans. They had a form that was familiar to us, but there was something different about them. Their size and presence were far beyond anything I had ever seen. When I was younger, I did not really understand measurements or how tall things were. I did not know what 6 feet or 7 feet looked like, so I would compare everything to my dad. My dad became my way of understanding size. My dad is around 5 feet 8 or 5 feet 9 inches tall, and what I remember is that a normal angel, one that looked like a human, was about 1.5 times the size of my dad. They were much larger than people, but they still had a familiar appearance. The archangel Gabriel was even bigger than the other angels, but the archangel Michael was on another level. I remember Michael being about twice the size of the other angels. He also always carried a flaming sword, and as a little boy, I thought that was one of the coolest and most amazing things I had ever seen. But heaven was not anything like the old Tom and Jerry cartoons where people simply sit on clouds, play harps, and sing forever. Heaven was so much more alive, beautiful, and complete than that. Heaven was a real place filled with incredible things. There were people, animals, angels, grass, trees, rivers and water, skies and buildings. It was not an empty place or somewhere where nothing happened. It was full of life, movement, beauty, and joy. There was even food in heaven. I remember eating a lot of pizza and macaroni and cheese because those were some of my favorite foods when I was a child. They were the foods I loved most at that time, and honestly, they might still be some of my favorites today. Could something greater have been behind his extraordinary experience? Or was it simply a coincidence that changed his life forever? Stay tuned to find out. Colton Burpo's life-changing experience. In Nebraska, 2003, a 3-year-old boy suddenly becomes seriously ill, but doctors cannot immediately understand what is happening. They search for answers, but the cause of his sickness remains unclear. For 5 long days, his condition continues to deteriorate. He becomes weaker, more tired, and less responsive as his body struggles to fight whatever is happening inside him. He begins losing weight and eventually drops down to only 33 pounds. Finally, after days of uncertainty, doctors perform a CT scan and discover the shocking truth. His appendix has ruptured, and the situation has become life-threatening. With no time to waste, he is rushed into emergency surgery as doctors fight to save his life. But one question remains on everyone's mind. Will they be able to save him in time? At the center of this terrifying moment is Colton Burpo, a little boy who is almost 4 years old. As he lies in surgery, his parents, Todd and Sonia, wait anxiously, praying and hoping that their son will come through. But this was not the first challenge the family had faced that year. Before Colton's medical emergency, the Burpo family had already gone through a series of painful and stressful situations. They had dealt with a shattered leg, multiple surgeries, and even a frightening cancer scare that left them worried about their future. Now, they were facing another devastating crisis with Colton's ruptured appendix. Along with the emotional pain and fear, the family was also under financial pressure because of the growing medical expenses. The medical bills were becoming overwhelming, adding even more stress to an already difficult situation. While Colton was in surgery, his father, Todd, stayed in one room praying intensely. He cried out to God, asking for protection and mercy over his son's life. At the same time, Sonia reached out to everyone she could, contacting friends, family members, and members of their church community, asking them to pray for Colton's recovery. As doctors worked to save the life of the 3-year-old boy, Colton was unconscious on the operating table. It was during this first surgery that he later described experiencing what he called a near-death experience. According to Colton, he felt himself leaving his body and rising above the scene. Looking down, he said he could see the doctors working on him, watching as they desperately tried to save his life. He also described seeing his parents during that moment. He saw his mother in another room, speaking on the phone, reaching out to people, and praying with those who were supporting the family. He saw his father in a separate room, praying loudly and crying out to God because of his fear, frustration, and desperation.
I looked down, I saw the doctors, they were working on me. My mom, I saw her in one room. She was like on the phone talking with people, praying. My dad, he was in another room, and he was praying very loudly at God.
At that moment, Colton said he was frightened and completely confused. He had no understanding of what was happening or why he was seeing these things. He could see what was taking place around him, but he did not know why he was experiencing it. While Colton could not reach his parents, his mother was gathering people together, asking their church, friends, and family members to pray for her son. His father was also fighting through his emotions, pleading with God and searching for hope during one of the most difficult moments of his life. Then, according to Colton's account, something unexpected happened. A man appeared beside him, and there was something about this person that immediately felt familiar and comforting. The man looked at him and asked, "Are you Todd's son?" Colton answered, "Yes." The man then responded, "Well, that makes me his grandpa." After those words, the man guided Colton away from the hospital and continued with him on what he described as a journey beyond this world. What followed after this mysterious experience, and could the encounter that changed everything have brought hope, purpose, and positive changes to his family? Keep watching to find out. After Colton's near-death experience. Colton remained in the hospital for 17 days, but when he finally woke up, something incredible happened. His recovery was much faster than anyone expected. After everything his body had gone through, he was suddenly active again, playing, moving around, and acting like himself once more. His father, Todd, still remembers the moment when everything seemed to change. After watching his son suffer for days, that night brought a surprising turnaround. Colton began improving, his strength started returning, and he got up and started playing again. It was hard to believe because just the day before, he had been lying in pain and fighting for his life. The following morning, the doctor entered the room carefully and slowly, preparing himself for what he might see. But instead of finding Colton struggling like before, he saw something completely different. Colton was sitting up comfortably, happily playing with his toys, and looking healthy and full of life. The doctor was shocked by the sudden change. Looking at Colton, he asked, "What happened?" Even the nurses could not explain what they were seeing.
I remember one nurse pulled me aside and said, "Mr. Burpo, we don't know what happened, but this is a miracle." And so we thought at that point in time, okay, God answered prayer. We knew we had a miracle. We get to go home.
One nurse pulled Mr. Burpo aside and told him, "Mr. Burpo, we don't know what happened, but this is a miracle." For Colton's family, that moment confirmed what they had been praying for. They believed God had answered their prayers and that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. After the fear, uncertainty, and emotional pain they had experienced, they were finally able to bring Colton home. However, the full story of what happened during those critical moments would not become clear immediately. It took several years for Colton's family to slowly put together the pieces of his near-death experience and understand the things he had experienced. At the time, Colton was only a young child. He was just a toddler, too young to understand that the things he was saying were unusual, surprising, or things he should not have known. He was not trying to convince anyone or create a story. He simply shared his memories as they came to him naturally. His parents were especially amazed when Colton began talking about meeting his sister in heaven. He described her appearance in a way that seemed to match their family, even though they had never told him about her. After sharing his divine encounter with the world, did Colton face criticism and backlash, or was his story accepted by everyone? Stay tuned to find out. The controversy behind Colton Burpo's heaven story. For years, Colton Burpo's story of visiting heaven has inspired millions of people, with many believing it was a powerful miracle. However, the story has also faced controversy, as critics have questioned whether his experience was truly a journey to heaven or something else. They argue that while Colton may have experienced something real, some details of his story do not fully match modern views of death, the soul, and heaven. One major criticism is that Colton never actually died. According to the movie, his heart continued beating, and his brain never stopped functioning. Critics argue that, based on many modern Christian beliefs, the soul leaves the body only after death, making the idea of Colton's soul traveling to heaven while his body remained in surgery difficult to explain. They also question whether Colton's experience can truly be called a near-death experience, since he was never medically dead. Some researchers argue that NDEs can be explained by changes in the brain during extreme medical conditions rather than proof of an afterlife. Critics have also pointed to details from Colton's description of heaven, including angels with wings, the appearance of Jesus, and other images they believe seem more connected to childhood imagination and religious teachings than traditional Christian theology. Supporters, however, argue that heaven may appear differently to each person, and that God could reveal himself in a way people can understand. They believe Colton's young age and the details he shared make his story meaningful. Did Colton's story go beyond a personal experience? eventually becoming a published account. And how did the world react to it? Keep watching to find out. The story and controversy behind Heaven is for Real. The book Heaven is for Real, a little boy's astounding story of his trip to heaven and back, is the remarkable story of Colton Burpo, a young boy whose claimed journey to heaven became known around the world. Published in 2010, the Christian biography was written by Colton's father, Methodist pastor Reverend Todd Burpo from rural Nebraska, together with author Lynn Vincent, and was published by Thomas Nelson Publishers. The book tells the story of Colton's serious illness in 2002, when he was almost 4 years old, and the experience he said he had during surgery for a ruptured appendix. According to Colton, he experienced what he described as a near-death experience and visited heaven while doctors were fighting to save his life. The book quickly gained worldwide attention after its release. Within just 10 weeks of being published in November 2010, it reached number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. By January 2011, about 200,000 copies had already been printed, and by March 2011, it reached number 1 on the New York Times best-selling nonfiction paperback list, where it remained among the top 10 for several weeks. The success of the book continued to grow over the following years. By April 2012, more than 1 million electronic copies had been sold, and by 2014, more than 10 million copies had been sold worldwide. A movie adaptation based on the book was released on April 16, 2014, and it became a major box office success, earning about $101 million. However, despite its popularity and the number of people who believed Colton's story, Heaven is for Real also faced criticism and controversy, including from some members of the Christian community. Some questioned parts of the story, arguing that certain claims went beyond what is written in the Bible. The Berean Call, a Christian ministry and newsletter, criticized the book for what it described as extra-biblical and problematic claims. The organization also pointed out that there was no medical evidence proving that Colton was clinically dead during his surgery. Christian author and pastor John MacArthur also criticized the book, stating that its description of heaven and the afterlife did not match what he believed was a biblical understanding. In an interview with The New Yorker, Lynn Vincent, one of the book's co-authors, revealed that she worried some Christians might reject the story if certain details were included, especially descriptions of people in heaven having wings. In 2014, Christian writer Hank Hanegraaff also expressed doubts about Colton's account. In his Ask Hank column for the Christian Research Journal, published by the Christian Research Institute, he listed several reasons why he questioned the story. One of his concerns was that many people who report near-death experiences often describe very different and sometimes conflicting experiences. He also suggested that the Burpo family's beliefs may have influenced the way they interpreted and presented Colton's experience. The story faced even more controversy in 2015 when Alex Malarkey, a boy who had written a similar book called The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven, publicly admitted that his own story was not true. Malarkey stated that the near-death experience described in his book was fictional and criticized Christian publishers and bookstores for selling popular heaven tourism books that he claimed were profiting from false stories. Could Colton Burpo's life hold more than the extraordinary encounter that made him famous? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for staying with us as we looked into the life of Colton Burpo after his divine encounter. Could this experience change his life for good? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more stories. See you there.